Okay, welcome back to the AEC Hive podcast, where we're talking about innovation in architecture, engineering, and construction. I'm Ralph Montague. I'm a director at ArcDocs and co-founder of the AEC Hive. I'm joined by John Egan, who's my fellow co-founder. John, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Yeah, hi everyone. John Egan from BIM Launcher here, co-founder at AEC Hive.
So we're very excited today to be joined by Tom Bartley, who's the co-founder and CEO at Barbell. Tom has a long history in the built environment sector with BIM and other things, and so we're very excited to hear what Tom's doing. Tom, do you want to give a quick introduction to everybody about yourself, where you've come from, what you're doing at the moment?
Of course. Thank you, Ralph. Yes, my name's Tom Bartley. I am, as you say, co-founder and CEO of Barbell. My background is that I have an engineering doctorate in BIM for highway projects, and I was very much involved with an infrastructure consultancy in the UK, and we were starting in 2012 with what's this BIM thing, and we do roads, so how does that apply to us? And over the years that followed that, I really tracked the evolution of the BIM journey in the UK. And in 2018, I started my own company, Barbell. We are inspired by how digital sectors work, and really what we're all about is bringing inspiration from how the software industry works into more traditional sectors. Primarily, we're a document editor, but we're inspired by things like GitHub and agile ways of working, and we want to get people collaborating in a more open and transparent way. Very much interested in consensus building and what that means in the web-enabled world.
So you dealing with mainly how contracts are written and put together, and how specifications are. So are you dealing more with the written component of the industry, or is it?
That's right. So Barbell was born out of a project that we did with Highways England. Highways England in the UK run the motorway network. They have a suite of standards called the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges. When we first got a hold of it in 2016, it was 12,000 pages long, 500 documents, and 15 years out of date. And we really had 2.5 years to completely revise the whole document set. And one of the reason I was involved was to future-proof it for advances in IT. That was the slogan that went alongside the business case. We went and spent quite a bit of money bringing it up to probably the most advanced set of construction standards for the infrastructure sector in the world. And really, what it came down to is you've got to get your house in order before you can digitize. And these messy documents that had 4 or 5 paragraphs where 15 requirements would be all tangled up with each other, and it was very difficult to know what was a requirement, what was advice, what was just there for information. And so Barbell is really about giving a lot of clarity to the way that contract specifications are written, helping people negotiate contracts more efficiently, but ultimately we store documents in a digital format. Every sentence gets its own global UID so that APIs can reference content out. We don't move files around, we move content around, we manage content at the sentence level rather than at the document level. So it's really about kind of an evolved approach to version control and collaboration, and how different people can work on documents in different ways and bring them together to get something that's greater than we can achieve at the moment.
That's fascinating, because if you think about the years that people have been talking about the digital transition of construction, and yet the very thing that drives construction is the contracts, and they are very static, paper-based documents at the moment.
Absolutely.
And as you said, very, very outdated. That's interesting. And you've written a blog recently, and I think this is something you want to talk about, about the Internet of Construction and how the industry might progress beyond BIM. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by progressing beyond BIM?
Yes. So as I said, I was quite involved with the BIM developments in the UK. I was part of the PAS 1192 Part 2 steering group at BSI, and I was involved with the implementation of BIM into several major infrastructure schemes in the UK, both road and rail. And what I witnessed was some really good efforts based on technologies that were defined around what was available in 2012. And BIM Level 2 concept in the UK became the basis of BIM according to ISO 19650, which is the global approach to BIM. And what I was seeing was kind of a disconnect between all the frameworks up until BIM according to 19650 were that there's BIM level 1, BIM level 2, BIM level 3. And suddenly we'd stop talking about BIM level 3 and what the future was because it was too difficult to grasp. And so what I've tried to do is reposition a vision for what BIM level 3 might be by stop talking about BIM, because BIM has become such a sullied word in many sectors, and actually start thinking about just a new concept for how we approach information, collaboration, and just the whole construction process, frankly, based on a new mindset, which is not about collaboration. It's about interoperability. It's not about humans doing rote work. It's about automated services going off and doing things automatically where it's sensible to do so. It's not about waterfall project management methodology. It's about concurrent working, iterative working that allows things to run 1,000 times over based on the contributions of all the skills and knowledge that's required. So it's really just repositioning the way that we think about the future of digital construction, taking us beyond where we are today and perhaps where we might be in 2035, 2040.
The digital construction, I mean, the purpose of it, I suppose, is to get to a physical construction eventually, and then to maintain and operate that asset, whatever it may be for the future. And, if you think about at the moment how that physical asset comes to be through its life cycle, it's quite a tedious process, and there's a lot of rework happening all the time. If you're interested in roads, I suppose you could take a bridge or something. There would be a brief put together for the bridge, and as you said, that would be a written contract and a written document and a written specification. There'd be some sort of concept design put together, which would go through a number of iterations until a concept was approved and a feasibility for the bridge was accepted. Then it would go through another iteration of developing a scheme design, which could get planning permission and building control approval, and then another iteration to put some technical information together in order to get a price from somebody to build it, and then another iteration to actually be able to construct and assemble that bridge. And then another iteration of capturing all the as-built information, because invariably something would have changed during the construction of it. And that gets thrown over to the client at the end. And then, of course, as the asset gets maintained and operated, things keep changing. Nothing's really static in the built environment. So how do you see that improving? I mean, do we reverse engineer, or do those stages stay the same? Or
I mean, the concept of how do you go from idea to completion and through to the life of the asset, I think is kind of fundamentally sound. The challenge is how much waste is there during that process? How much delay is there going from conceptual design, which is a really creative activity? It's about understanding a whole host of trade-offs that you need to make, whether that's stakeholder, whether it's environmental, whether it's technical, business case, business operating models, etc. And so that creative design needs to be based on both kind of human understanding of the problem, but also we can do like a million iterations that allow you to trade off all those things and see all those different tensions and see what comes out as a potential output. And obviously, like the things like public consultation, bringing people along the journey, etc. But the challenge, I think, is about how do currently the architect and the structural engineer and the electrical engineer and the mechanical engineer, all these different roles, are waiting on each other for information, and each of their activities takes time. And what we know is that an awful lot of that those activities that take place are quite automatable. And what we then have is these very long feedback loops whilst one profession waits for the other profession to bring their outputs. The more that we can automate those individual discrete tasks that each profession needs to do, the quicker those feedback loops are, and therefore the more we can optimize and the quicker we can get towards the solution that we need. So that the iteration is actually something that can be leveraged when things are efficient, but when things aren't efficient, it's something you absolutely want to avoid. But if imagine that the architect and the structural engineer could exchange information 5 times an hour rather than once a week on a Friday when the things get uploaded to the document management system, we could see so much more creative solutions to problems.
And is that because the way we're exchanging information at the moment is through these sort of whole models of thousands of components? And you have to wait until that model is at a sufficient stage of development before it's worth exchanging with somebody else to look at. Just that concept of I've got to get my model complete, and I've got to a point before I'm willing to share it with other people. and it's, in order for it to look complete, it should have so much of the work done, and that's why people are waiting. Instead
I think
of figuring out a small, we could exchange. I'm just thinking aloud now, but take that bridge. If we could say, let's make a decision on the lights. That's just one component of a bridge, is the street lights. Let's talk about street lights and agree those, and let's not wait until the whole bridge and all the barriers and all the signs and all the lights and everything's complete before we exchange information and assess it and analyze it.
Yeah, and I think there's a few interesting things there, Ralph. The first bit is the assumption that it's a human that's going to receive that information when it's made available to them. And actually, what if we have better interoperability between engineering systems that allow one to interpret the other and to optimize between them, actually, that we can take the human out of the loop for that automatable stuff. Whatever it might be, there might be parameters in which you can. Let's take lights. The placement of the lights might be arbitrary. It's that there's enough lighting given to the bridge deck so that it's safe to use. Actually, does a human need to be part of that process or not? Well, there might need to be a creative element to it at some point. But actually, if the structural members are moving around, all that needs to be known is that the structural members are in a location, and can a compliant design be produced where the lighting is also installable. I think imagining that information is, you're right, I think there's this real thing about getting it ready to share it because you're going to be judged by your peers, but actually it's about getting that information in an individual level ready for the next activities, and that's where your exchange information requirements become really granular and allow the next set of actions to be automatically triggered when that information is made available, rather than when a package is shared and the person makes themselves available. The other aspect that I think is kind of really important in the Internet of Construction idea is, I don't think I use the word exchange of information at all. I think I say that the information becomes available on the Internet of Construction, and an API can pull that information when it's needed, and processes can get triggered automatically when certain cases are met. So, for instance, the exchange information requirements are satisfied. That allows the next process in the chain to kick off, and that might pull information that rapidly iterates and bounces between 20 different microprocesses, as I call them, that bring it all together. And I'd be really interested to speak to John and get his view on this, because we had a bit of debate about what a container is, and I think it's a really important aspect of what happens in the future, because I really feel like the concept of a common data environment is going to become more and more a legacy function that provides the audit trail, that provides the ledger of how things were transacted, not necessarily the place where you go to for the data. It becomes just a list of what information is available and where you can access it, where you can pull the information from. So yeah, I think that concept of what is a container, is really going to have to change, like literally at the object level, the individual element. Or maybe the volume, or maybe it is the whole site, but it will change.
Maybe even down to the parameter level.
Absolutely.
So as you're doing in Barbell, where you're taking complex documents and you're sort of bringing it right down to the sentence level. So each sentence has a life of its own, if you like. In these complex models of the future, you could say that every parameter of every object would have a life of its own. So
definitely.
So there's a tier of containers. There's the overall model, which contains a lot of objects, which contain a lot of parameters, so you can get quite granular. And I think that sort of automated, computers working with millions of data points is a very feasible thing. Humans are working with 1 million data points is not a feasible thing at all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think, John?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation, obviously. From my perspective is certainly grounded by the existing way that information is exchanged between different stakeholders on the project today. And I believe that we need to start with the problem set at hand. And that starts with our architects, engineers, contractors exchanging documents. And that's why I'm so zoned in documents. I'm not a lover of documents. I really want to get down to our object level where every parameter, like you say, Ralph, and Tom, like you're doing with your sentences in Barbell, have attaching a unique identifier to them and moving those through the life cycle of the project. But I just don't feel that the industry is there yet. And the reason I suppose, is that none of our contracts are saying you must deliver, this, like, they're not being specific to the point that the information that stakeholders have to deliver, that we can actually make that deliverable via, objects, if you like.
Sorry, but and one of the things that I put forward in the blog is that the role of the BIM manager, or changing to moving from being an information manager to being a systems architect. And actually, as you start to define the construction project in terms of its processes, in terms of its inputs and its outputs, those exchange information requirements become emergent, because you say, well, in order for the structural engineer to do their job, they need this information from these other people. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the beauty of writing a paper and not actually working in the software itself is that I can just paint a vision for the future, and I completely appreciate where you're coming from, John.
It is so the professionals to define the project. If you're an architect, that's your role, to define the architectural vision and what the project is going to be. If you're an engineer, it's your role to define the structural performance of the project. Or if you're a services engineer, it's your role to define the
when I say architecture, I'm thinking of systems architecture rather than the actual architecture of the asset. So thinking, and we get so tripped over these words that have been misused or reused by the military and others that have come from the built environment. I think one of the other things I pick up, Ralph, on that one is how one of the major barriers to BIM adoption, in my view, is how transparent the technology is. That we suddenly ask architects to understand how to interpret Uniclass and how to interpret all these naming conventions that are used across the spectrum, and even down to exchange information requirements. These things are very technical. It's a new discipline. It's a new skill. We have to translate. If one project is using, say, Uniclass, another is using a client's proprietary naming convention, another is using Omniclass, another is this. We have to reinvent. We have to reconceive. And I think what the technology should be doing is being very hidden behind, in the same way that you do your internet banking. You don't know what the banking protocols are doing behind the scenes, but they're whizzing around exchanging data with whatever it needs, with the regulator, with the different banking systems. These are all protocols in the same way that I imagine for the internet of construction that become hidden and aren't visible at the point of use, allowing architects just to be architects and mechanical engineers just to be mechanical engineers without having to understand that PR_1_52_53 is a pipe. That might not be correct. Probably isn't.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Tom, is that we need to create a clear separation between the systems architects who design these processes and implement them systematically to connect all these different services. We need to essentially separate that role from the existing industry. And that role would be a provision of an infrastructure system, which would essentially be this Internet of Construction, in which projects can operate at the maximum efficiency, and people that are trained to be architects and engineers and contractors can be architects, engineers and contractors without needing to worry about all of the depths of problems and knowledge and things that are required for system architecture and the implementation of that. But
I'd slightly disagree with that, because one of my bugbears about software in the AEC sector is it's designed and built by people who have no idea how the industry works. As an architect, so just be careful when you separate those two things too much, where you end up with IT people trying to impose something on an industry that has a very particular way in which it works. And
there's a product management thing here, Ralph. You're absolutely right. But I think that it's currently the wrong way. That if I want to get my BIM model to interoperate with another trade's BIM model, I have to understand how they've done things. And I think those interoperability aspects should be hidden from the user. They should just work. They should just be seamless.
That part I agree with.
We recently had a user experience designer join us at Barbal, and she doesn't know at all how computers work. But what she does understand is how to understand user needs, how to translate the problems that users have into designs for an application that the engineers can then interpret and turn into software code. And I was just fascinated by this because I think as an engineer myself, I just need to know how everything works. So therefore, I'm at Barbell, I'm the CEO, I'm the product manager, I've done loads of coding myself, I'm also the user, I'm also this. And actually for Ellie, her role is to be the user experience specialist. And she doesn't need to know how the software works because we have software specialists that know how to build software. And the more we can, I think, approach this thing. So we say, well, look, the architect doesn't need to know how the BIM system is thinking. It just works for them. But there is a translator required that can turn the architect's needs into something that works the way the architect needs it to be.
For me, ISO 19650 seems to be the playbook for BIM on projects. That's how I understand it. What this playbook is made up of is a set of processes in which stakeholders can engage with one another in a digital way, exchange information, etc. I completely agree with both Ralph and yourself, Tom, that we need a separation of these roles, but I equally agree with Ralph saying that we almost need this to be tightly integrated with each of the stakeholder organizations so that, you know, we don't have a software developer build something completely irrelevant to the industry.
Well, if a software developer wants to build something completely irrelevant to the industry, they just won't succeed, right? So it's not a problem.
The systems architect, the way that you described the evolution of the BIM manager into the systems architect, I think that, or I suppose the question for you would be, do you believe that ISO 19650 can be the playbook for the Internet of Construction? Can it be the start point in which BIM managers abstract the processes from ISO 19650 into their set of building blocks? Let's say, for instance, we introduce some visual programming language that can engage with the different APIs belong to the different solutions that everyone is using. And they actually have the tooling to be able to set up these processes, to be able to download a file from one software, send it to another service to convert it to another format, send it to another service to slightly alter the format, and then send it to another project management solution in which the team would eventually receive the information. If we had that, do you think that that's a likely scenario in which we see that 19650 would evolve from or evolve to? And what's your vision there?
So I think 19650 is a brilliant foundation from which we move, because we do stop talking about BIM level 2 in the UK, and we start moving forward into just thinking about the information delivery lifecycle. And the 19650 is quite neutral in terms of the technology approach that's taken, and it is I think, as you say, John, a stepping stone into the next level. The challenge is that it's trying to be both things. It's trying to be readable, or maybe its implementation. The practitioner is supposed to be able to understand what it says as well as the technologist. And what I think we need is a clearer layer between what resources are practitioner facing and what resources are the technologist facing, and actually having two sets of guidance that sit alongside each other, or two sets of standards that interoperate with themselves, and making it clearer that what we don't expect someone's role to be one day be a design manager, next day be a BIM manager, and next day be a structural engineer. That these are different skill sets that actually are professions and skills in their own right. And we find people in much clearer jobs where they're not trying to jump between all these different roles. And then product, as we said, product management and comms and stakeholder engagement becomes very important.
So ISO 19650 has a UX problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely. I mean, BIM has a UX problem. This is the
title for the talk.
Yeah. That's it. And I started the paper off with 4 observations, and I think the breadth of what BIM is trying to do is a big challenge. But yeah, the systems architecture of BIM is far too transparent. The UX is dreadful for anyone that's trying to learn it, and we need experts in doing it, and we need experts in being construction practitioners, and they're different skill sets. And at the moment, it's not normalized properly at the moment.
So another thought that I wanted to drill into, obviously 19650 talks about interoperability and the exchange of information through its life cycle. It says that metadata and information should be exchangeable between the solutions as it evolves throughout its life cycle.
You have preempt the question, John. Things like the BuildingSMART data dictionary are going to be absolutely essential. I think ideas like there's the W3C, the World Web Consortium, have lots of technologies defined for mapping classification schemes, naming schemes, taxonomies, ontologies, whatever you want to each other. And the BuildingSMART data dictionary definitely provides a basis because it says, you say this, I say this. And there might be need for, like, internally we call it this and externally it's called this, and it doesn't matter because it interoperates. And the more we have these schemas that map to each other, the more this becomes possible. But absolutely, the data, metadata and everything should become interoperable, but it needs to be translatable rather than necessarily.
But one of the big evolutions and steps that I see in this internet of construction is a shift from exchanging information to making information available. And I would describe it almost as a paradigm shift for the way that the information technology operates in the construction industry, whereby everyone holds their own data and they have an access layer, an API in front of them, where certain users with certain roles and certain permissions on the project can access their data, and that's predefined in their interface ultimately. Do you think ISO 19650 is going to go in that direction? And where, are we talking 5 years, 10 years, or how do you think 19650 is going to evolve there? Are we going to have new parts that say, okay?
There's definitely need to be a need for guidance. Looking back to where the concept of the common data environment comes from and the development that went into BS 1192 2007, it was never engineered such that it had to be a single document management system or a number of document management systems. What it says is there is an environment whereby data is available to the commonly, if we turn it round, and that might be APIs. And so the metadata, the suitability codes, the naming conventions, I think that is probably going to go by the wayside, quite frankly, or it becomes an archival function because it's the ledger says this information was available. Yeah, it is a paradigm shift, but I don't think it's fundamentally changes that information has a suitability, that information is made available to certain people, that it's made available to one set of stakeholders, then another set of stakeholders, and then all the permissions. It's the same ideas. It's just that we're not restricted. We're not having to teach architects how to use archdocs on one project. Sorry, no, not Ralph. That's not one, is it? We're not, whatever it might be. You're learning ProjectWise this week and you're learning AconX the next week and you're learning, and you're stuck by restricted in your ways of working. As an architect, I can't work how I want to work because I've got to use this document management system on this project. Now the architect should be working the way they want to work, and the structural engineer should be working the way they want to work, the way that's efficient and is systematized and really fast. And then people could just pull and access the information via a defined API.
But you also need a defined data model to go with that, right? So you need to have...
Yeah.
So, and this comes to our point about, this is a project that Ralph and I have been working on around an open information container initiative. It's the project working name. It's essentially setting up a common taxonomy or classification for the common types of information that's exchanged on a project. So, for example, an RFI would have its own taxonomy. A safety incident would have its own, a drawing would have its own. So essentially what we've identified is that the Uniclass 2015 project management tables and the what was the other table, Ralph? There's two tables.
Form of information.
Yeah, forms of information.
Yeah.
Then in that you have a classification code. You have no definition for in that you have a classification code, so you can essentially reference the name of the form of information or project management piece of information. We have no way of describing each of those. And in all of the common project management systems, you've mentioned a few already, you have these vendors describing these common pieces of information in different ways. It would be our view that if we could standardize those, so we could get some sort of global reference available for an RFI. And for example, a client or whoever is owner of the data environment could say, look, all stakeholders, if you're going to engage in this project with any tool or solution, your solution must describe this form of information or this project management piece of information like this. Mm-hmm. And what this will afford is us to exchange these information containers throughout the life cycle of the solution.
Yeah.
Now this is
I don't think the ISO 19650 is the problem. Like, it describes the management and exchange of containers, and it also says that a container can be a number of things. It could be a folder of files, it could be a file, it could be a set of objects or layers within a file. It could be a paragraph within a document. So it's quite open in its description. I think the problem is the granularity that people are used to in the industry is files. So you get a big file with lots of layers, or you get a big file with lots of sections and paragraphs. You get a big file with lots of BIM objects in them, and within each object, an object within a model is also a container, and within each object there's a whole set of parameters. And I think just the human mind can't sort of grasp that we wouldn't manage things at a very granular level, because previously that was very difficult. So take a specification. Yes. Like, a specification document is made up of sections, which is made up of a set of paragraphs, which is made up of sentences. And in what it sounds like you're doing, Tom, is you sort of digitizing that to a very granular level, where each sentence has a life of its own, and a group of sentences make up a paragraph, assume, and a set of paragraphs makes up a section of the document, and the sections make up the document. I think that's the problem. What you're doing is effectively a group of containers of a specific type, and managing that in a digital process. So exactly the way ISO 19650 says.
I completely agree. I think ISO 19650 does support this notionally. The common data environment talks about containers purposefully. It doesn't talk about files. But then it's, John, you make the point, how does this translate into something that's actually implementable? How do we get to this point? And standards are the answer. Standardization of everything of anything that relates to interoperability is going to be the key. It's going to be very messy on the way there, but if we look at how the World Wide Web has evolved, there's just loads of standards out there, and some succeed and some sink. And the challenge is getting enough resources behind a standard that you can build enough support, you can build enough consensus, you can get enough people at the table to say this is a problem that's big enough for us. And frankly, actually just the effort of the work to decide. We went through a similar exercise this summer. We've been supporting a group called Construction Knowledge Task Group, and they're a consortium of the biggest publishers of knowledge resources in the UK. So it's got the likes of the Construction Innovation Service, there's BSI, there's Designing Buildings Wiki, there are the major professional institutions, there are a few contractors, manufacturers, consultants. And we had exactly the same thing, John. We were essentially saying, how do we make, at the moment, there's no way of identifying a resource as a construction knowledge resource. And so the only way to find anything is by Google. And Google won't find things that are behind firewalls, but people are trying to protect their IP, and therefore there's this real. So we wanted to standardize the metadata around knowledge and make it discoverable. And we looked at the Uniclass form of information table and the project management tables to say, well, how do we classify knowledge? And we found out that there was no way of doing it, so we had to build our own standard. It's not a BSI standard, it's not an ISO standard, it's not an MBS, it's not an anyone, it's these 15 organizations that have got together and agreed. Well, in the UK, that's how we're going to do it for these types of resources. And it took some work. We got a grant from the Lloyd's Register Foundation to do it. It was supported by the Open Data Institute as well. And it was about 6 months worth of work. But what we've got is something that's really powerful and hopefully will be adoptable by other people. But it does need work, and it does need, and there's also a bit of a camp that says we need to force into the existing standards, and if the existing standards don't work, market forces need to apply.
Yeah.
And we need to let them die.
And what's happening with that work? Is it being opened up to the industry to contribute to or comment on? Or
it's all hosted on our software, and which is an open source project that allows anyone to come along, raise an issue, propose a change, be involved. The group is convened by Gregor Harvey, who's the founder of Designing Buildings Wiki, and anyone that wants to be involved is very welcome to be. We're looking for technology providers to build search engines and build business models on top of the standards, as much as publishers to publish their metadata in that way.
And what the process you went through, I mean, is there something that the AEC sector could learn? How did you get it started? How did you?
Sure. So Barbell we developed our own methodology for standardization. It's pretty much based on any kind of consensus building framework. We call it open consensus. One of the founding ideas was my frustration with the BSI and ISO process, which is very much behind closed doors. And the definition of consensus is no sustained opposition, not everyone agreeing and defending this output. And so what we try and do is, how do we actually get to consensus being something where everyone does support this document? And so we have a framework that we follow, a 4-step methodology. It's we publish it under Open Creative Commons so that people can use it. And it's about convening people, bringing them together, defining the goals, setting a strategy, agreeing what the outcomes look like, and only then starting to work on the technical draft. Because you've already got people behind the vision of it. And I think this is, coming back to the Internet of Construction or whatever else, it's getting people behind the vision. Everyone signed up to the vision first before saying, here's a draft, please adopt it. Now, there are lots of web standards which have gone completely opposite way around. It's been a geek in their bedroom writing a technical standard that they've used for their own product, and they've put it on GitHub, and others have adopted it, and that's another model. But you've got a discovery issue, and I think for construction, for AEC, we need to be more consensus driven because there's so many stakeholders involved in development.
I mean, in the project John mentioned earlier that we sort of initiated, we sort of imagined the sort of tiered approach to granularity, where we started at the exchange of files. So that's, as John said, that's where we are today. We're exchanging big files with lots of content in them, but that's just what people do. So let's start there. And we sat down and we sort of came up with 140, I think it was, John, sort of parameters of information you'd need to understand about a file to give that file proper meaning. And we just kind of listed those and had a podcast discussion about them with a group of people. But that's at the highest level. Then the next step would be to say, well, how many different types of files would there be? So if you take the information table in Uniclass, I think they have 100 different types of files or forms of information. Now, is that comprehensive enough or not? So I suppose that's a question to be answered. And then there's the big amount of work really is to look at each of those 100 file types and say, well, what do you need to know about an RFI? What do you need to know about a safety issue? What do you need to know about
You've almost given the success criteria. In order for it to be considered an RFI, it has these attributes, and it contains this information, and that, it turns it on its head a little bit in that sense. It's not an RFI if it doesn't do these things. And it could also do these things. Yeah, absolutely. It's no one is ever happy with a classification system or a taxonomy. It never meets everyone's needs or everyone's view of the world. The key thing is it's consensus building and making sure that enough people who represent all the stakeholders are brought along and will support it, will defend it. With the construction knowledge types that we came up with, we started saying, well, ideally we want 10 to 15. We ended up with 45 in one draft. It went down to about 17. Then it kind of settled at around 22-ish. And it was really a lot of time on Zoom and using a lot of voting and using a lot of, but not voting yes or no, but let's get a temperature of the room. Okay, how do people feel about this? Has anyone got any strong objections to this? Okay, what are your objections? Okay, well, let's reimagine it, and jumping between things. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, but what people came up with, they're excited about.
And practically speaking, how is the construction knowledge, how is that used practically? Could we use it, for instance, to describe bodies of information within our organization, or would it be used, for example, if we wanted to push forward this project of the open information containers, or should we, or would perhaps your other methodology for pushing an open standard be more suitable? What would be our options there?
So it would be great if whatever you're producing gets published with the metadata that comes under discoverable construction knowledge. It's so there's two. The acronyms overlap a little bit, but discoverable construction knowledge is a data spec. It's built on Dublin Core. It leverages Uniclass. It leverages, I don't know if schema features, but there's a few open data standards that we built on. We've added about 5 of our own fields that relates purely to construction, and we've come up with a knowledge type classification, which is about 20 odd types. You can definitely use that. If you're producing a standard, there is a knowledge type called standard. There might be one in Uniclass, but it's not quite right because there are other things that could be called, you could use as well. There's guidance there. We looked at what's the, anyway, we kind of went round the house and like, what does guidance mean and how does this relate to that? And so we got to a point where we think there's no ambiguity, even though the terms aren't great, which I think is where you need to be. So the open consensus model is the model that I'd advocate for designing standards. It's all about being open source. It's all about bringing people in, involving people, making sure you're making it very clear what the goal is before you start drafting. I think one of the big challenges when you present a fait accompli to people, they instantly get their backs up because you haven't taken them on the journey. And as long as you keep taking people on a journey, what are we trying to achieve here? What's the end goal? Let's write quite a clear scope around this. Let's say what we're not going to try and achieve. If we set a vision and then we can set like a strategy around it, and phase 1 is this, phase 2 is that, then we'll go, okay, so let's decide, are we going to use RDF? Are we going to base it on Uniclass? Are we going to base it on this? Are we going to build on something that already exists? Are we going to create something new? Then you can start drafting.
If you're familiar with BuildingSMART, are you familiar with BuildingSMART and their internal processes?
I am not very familiar with BuildingSMART.
Okay, so it does sound quite similar. You propose, a group of you come together, you put together a project proposal that gets accepted by BuildingSMART. It's made into an official working group, and a group comes together. It gets some funding behind it, and stakeholders, vendors, system integrators, industry people can come into the room, and it's all about exactly what you're saying, consensus building, and essentially making some sort of an implementation around the idea, in which can be elevated then from BuildingSMART into ISO. And that's the journey in a nutshell. That a new idea will come from essentially ground up to standard. One of the key differences that I see, and something that I've been thinking about, is this open source model. Would we be better off, rather than pushing our knowledge into this closed ecosystem, which I call ISO, where things aren't very accessible, you pay for access to, whatever piece of knowledge it is. I get that they need money. I suppose that's outside the concept or the scope of the conversation, but I
think it is really important to the conversation.
Okay.
I mean, absolutely. I think the idea that you get volunteers together, take their IP and license it back to them at £150 a document is frankly nonsense.
Well, I'm glad you said it.
It's one of the key things about open is, first of all, it allows people to participate, and you accept all the stakeholders are willing to come to the table. You do listen to them. But the other part of being open source is about being transparent. And one of the reasons open source software is so successful is because people can poke it. People can interrogate it. People can go, has this got a virus? Has this got malicious aspects to it? Has this got, and I think for AEC standards, the equivalent is, has Autodesk pushed this in their direction? Has a vendor influence this in a certain way? And at the moment, the challenge with the closed door process of ISO is that you don't know who came to the table and the fact that you have to travel, the fact that you have to do this voluntarily, means that the big boys are going to protect their position. And so for smaller players, the challenge with ISO is it's an edict. And actually, it's not. These are voluntary standards, and we can choose to take them or we can leave them. And actually, competition in standards is really important as well. And actually allowing people to come together and say, we're going to throw out ISO 19650, we're going to write our own version of it that's better, that's transparent. I'm not saying 19650, by the way, and I know there'll be people get their backs up when I say that, but it's the one we're talking about today. But because it comes from ISO, it must be right. But actually, I have no idea who's involved with that. I can't poke it. I can't see the comments that were made. I can't see how decisions were taken. I can't see any of the things that would tell me whether this is actually appropriate for my, or actually stitching myself up and protecting the status quo because the people can afford to send someone to Guadeloupe to attend a committee meeting.
You've hit the nail on the head, Tom. I'm completely with you, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are also, getting riled up with their headphones on, thinking about an open source ISO 19650. I mean, that's certainly the mecca for. I think it's important, really.
There is a key point about financing, because these projects do take money to run.
Sure.
But I think knowing who's funded it is also really important. And if you look at the JavaScript Foundation, if you look at any web technology, they're all open source, public foundations that are sponsored by companies. But again, you can see who's involved, you can see what their interests are, and you can choose to take it or leave it. I also think there's a lot of inefficiencies in the existing way of working, which is why we've got solutions like Barbell being developed that allow people to work more efficiently without the cost of collating review comments and all that bit. We just take the admin away and make it cheaper to do. But yeah, the financial models need to be understood. But we have those, I think that the PASs in the UK are sponsored documents. It costs 50 grand to write a PAS, to get a PAS through, and the sponsor is on the front cover, and but because it's published by BSI, it becomes official, even though it's sponsored by a commercial interest. And I think the thing is, creating a system where a standard gets developed and published and you can take it or leave it. Let's agree that we need to use a standard, but let's choose the most appropriate standard and let the best ones win.
Final question from me. Is the open consensus like a culmination of your vision and hypothesis for how you believe standards should be developed from this point forward in the construction sector? Or what's your stance on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was so Barbal started as standards repo. We were going to be the world's repository for standards. Apparently there's not a lot of money in standards, and therefore we started to think about construction contracts. But the technology is still the same thing. And this idea of GitHub being used to drive the development of technical standards in software, can we apply that to people without having to learn how Git works, which is software version control that requires you to understand, use DOS interfaces to push things back and forth. Can we do that in a way that doesn't require you going through that learning curve? And actually, John, I will say that there are people using our tool to develop BIM ISOs as well. So I think you can do it at different stages, but the more open, the more transparent we can be, and the more inclusive we can be in the development of those standards, the more trust we can have in them.
So where can we find out more information about this open consensus model? Is this something you facilitate through the Barbell platform, or is this something in which is published on GitHub where we go to pick up as a set of documentation and run with? Or
the documents aren't very complete, but they are published on our platform. Yeah. And so the ideas are there, and I've described pretty much the idea. I mean, I think building methods and tools behind them is going to be something I want to do. It's something we try and embody in our software. It's not exclusive to our software. It's, as I say, anything we do for open consensus will be published under Creative Commons license. We are actually trademarking the term open consensus. That's not because we don't want people to use it. We just don't want people to misuse it like BIM is misused.
What sort of question I had after that. But in this future that you're imagining, the Internet of Construction, how are the lives of architects and engineers and contractors going to be different? I mean, as an architect, of all the tedious things I have to do, like a client says in their brief, for a school, they want a classroom. So I've got to go and do some product manufacturers for all the elements that make up a classroom, whiteboards and furniture and fit out and lights and carpets and whatever. Put a classroom together, get it approved, and go and collect all the information about all those components from the manufacturers at a point in time, collate it all together, and then send it off to a contractor to put a price together. He comes back with the wrong price, of course, and everything gets changed. The product I've selected gets swapped out for cheaper products, and I've given a task to compare the performance of the products that are being proposed to make sure they're not too cheap or too nasty. We don't end up in Grenfell territory. But that's the way things work. How will this be different in your vision of a future of the Internet of Construction?
Okay,
will it be referencing manufacturers' information rather than replicating it?
So let's play that through. So you're an architect. So the architect's practice has changed. As an architect, your job is to worry about the architecture of the building, or actually the architecture of buildings. So you'll be thinking about, what does a school need to be? How does it need to perform? How does a school fulfill its function as an educational institution? There'll also be people in the architect's practice who are thinking about, how do I turn that into programmatic knowledge? How do I turn that into systematic things that allow a trigger to come in and spit out an answer that embodies the knowledge you have as an architect? What will be produced? So as you'll be consulting, you're producing a brief, you'll be producing a design. I think the contractor in this scenario is probably cut out of it. There's going to be some sort of assembly organization. It might be, but in terms of the actual product selection, you'll be defining a specification for a product, and we'll have really good specifications that are watertight, and there'll be people bidding, like people bid on Google Ads, automatically in auctions, that say we can deliver the product that meets that specification for this price, and you've got open competitions that are automatically run through routines. The contractor's job is purely to be a contractor, in that their job is to be the assembler and to coordinate the activities on site based on a specification and a performance specification that's robust. The kind of idea that there are gatekeepers, that there are effectively, the contractor knows their mates who can supply chairs or whiteboards or whatever it might be, and they're bounded by the knowledge of their network, whether they're friends or not. Well, let's assume that it's completely fair and open. They're still bounded by the availability. We'll have a marketplace like Google Ads where people can just bid in on, and the lowest price wins, or whatever the lowest price for the performance specification, which is watertight, so we don't get a Grenfell scenario. Those products are certified by a body, so we can, the manufacturer will go and say, I've got these chairs, and the bidding platform will go to the certification body and verify at that point that those chairs meet that performance specification. And it all that routine, all that tedium, all that delay just goes away. And we know that the school meets the needs for the educators and for the children, and it delivers what it will be, and for the taxpayer it's at the most efficient price point.
So everybody wins. My life as an architect is much better. I'm not doing tedious, repetitive tasks.
Yeah, except for the people
I'm spending my time on the things I really enjoy, which is the design and how things come together, rather than trying to describe things that have already been described by other people who make those products.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Fascinating. Can't wait to get there.
We'll get there. But it needs people like you guys and John making these, just taking the plunge. Don't worry about the fact that there's these standards body that exist. Just get the people around the table who are going to take it through and just start doing it, and just start publishing it, and publish version 1 and get the feedback, and then publish version 2 and get the feedback. There needs to be a level of standards, which is why we do this consensus making up front. But equally, we just need to get going, and we need to not worry about these institutional artifacts. If it's good enough, it will be insurable.
I had one more question, and I wanted to ask, it's a little bit off track, but we want to talk about innovation on this podcast, and how can we get innovation to happen? You were one of the co-founders of a group called Built Environment, and understand from that was one of the aims of that organization was to sort of promote and foster innovation. That's about 4 or 5 years old, that group. Mm-hmm. What have been your experiences out of that effort? What has worked and what maybe hasn't worked? What have you found exciting? What have you found frustrating? How do we make innovation work? That's the question.
Yeah. Built Environment was born out of the BIM 2050 group, which was from the Construction Industry Council in the UK. And we were all brought together as a representative from each institution, professional institution, the body was 15 of us. And it was one of the most exciting, enthusiastic, amazing spaces to be, because people were taken away from their commercial setting, and they were just enthusiastic people were just allowed to talk and exchange ideas. And what we wanted to do with Built Environment was create a movement and create an environment really where innovation can flourish. And unfortunately, what happens is we all got jobs, or we got promoted, and we kind of grew up a little bit, and families and bits got in the way, and the Digital Twin Fan Club is kind of a child of Built Environment. I don't know if you've come across those guys, but it's the same people. What I think we needed, what we were trying to do, was trying to get a co-working space that allowed anyone working in the built environment to work together. And it was just about putting places where people can exchange ideas and just talk to each other. We also wanted to create seed funds so that people could, hackathons are great, but how do we take that from hackathon to the next stage, and actually creating an environment where people can just take 6 months out or 3 months out to work on an idea and build it up to the next stage. Maybe go through the whole business incubation exercise or whatever, but it was really about, there's lots of great ideas. There's lots of people coming through who are getting really jaded and frustrated. And some of the younger members of the group were like, I'm 22, 23. I've been in the industry 4 years and I'm fed up. And we were thinking, this is nonsense, because we need people like this that are just going to get, frankly, I think most of them have moved on now. Actually, they don't work in the sector anymore. Salaries are higher and the job's less stressful, in other industries. And we need, an environment where that feels fresh, that feels different, that feels less adversarial, that allows people to bounce ideas off them, that allows people the time to think through ideas. That's what it was all about. And I think we've all gone on to do quite interesting things, actually, and we're all, it was a great stepping stone for ourselves. And I know that Henry is trying to get something going as well with kind of a new generation of that, and we're all giving him our support.
Fantastic. Well, we've come to the hour and probably talk for another hour if we wanted to.
Sure.
But any final comments, John, or any questions?
I'd like to thank Tom. The talk has been really inspirational. You may have inspired me to write version 1 of the Open Information Container Initiative paper. Let's see, that could be on the way. Put it in the oven.
John, where's it being documented? That's my question. Every time on Twitter you talk about it, so where's it being documented? Just publish it. Put it under MIT, put it in Creative Commons 0. Just put it out there, let people use it. And just be transparent, and people will see that it's useful and they'll get involved.
Great. Tom, any parting words of wisdom for the audience?
I just think that people should just get on with things. And if you've got an idea, publish it. And I think there's just a general industry inertia around, we need a project initiation plan for any piece of work that gets done. And I see so many working groups get together and say, we've written this plan and we've gone for the permission seeking from different organizations. And actually, the more that we can do, just publish it, put it on the internet, write it on Medium, put it on Barbell, put it on Twitter.
On AEC Hive.
Put it on AEC Hive, put it on the Digital Twin Hub, let people see it, let people take that idea and run with it, or if it tell you it's rubbish, if it's rubbish, or there's a reason, often there's a reason why things are the way they are, but that's not to say they shouldn't be challenged. But you're going to learn in that process, and I think that's the big takeaway. Publish.
What's the old saying? It's better to ask forgiveness than ask for permission. Just get on and do it.
Nothing, quite frankly, a lot of the time. And we often trip over ourselves by permission seeking. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, just from my side as well, I just want to say that was a fantastic talk. Thanks very much. Greatly appreciate your time, and we'll put some of your links in the podcast as well, in the notes, and hope people will find you and work with Barbell and all the great things you're doing.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.